Welcome to Rewatch-and-Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other, and today's episode is Hannibal Season 3, Episode 10, and the Woman Clothed in Sun. Episode in a nutshell is a brief reminder of what happened in the episode. So we begin the episode with Bedelia giving a speech about her experience with Hannibal, not her actual one, but the one that she had made up, um, with, the being drugged and being like gaslit into believing she was Lydia when she really wasn't, that version of events. And Will crashes the speech, and as the speech ends, they have a bit of a confrontation, and she tells him if he wants to speak further, he'll have to make an appointment. We then move on to Reba and Dollarhide, and they are in a van and they go to a zoo where he takes her in to pet a sedated tiger, and they both seem to really enjoy this, so much so that they then return to his place where they have some drinks, and then they become physically intimate, have their little afterglow. The next morning he wakes up, she's out of the bed, he runs up to his secret attic room where he keeps his painting and is all worried about the blind person, I suppose, seeing something. And basically, when he does eventually find her in his very large house, she says it's time for her to go home, and he very quickly agrees, saying that he will take her. We then have a brief little blip where we're at Hannibal's prison cell, and he makes a call to where basically Chilton now works, or his publishing house for the book, somewhere related to Chilton, and gets Will's contact information before we then see him licking an envelope that is going to be sent to Bedelia, who is having a therapy session with Will and comments on her only contact with Hannibal being him sending her greeting cards. Her and Will then discuss Hannibal and how vulnerable Will was to Hannibal versus her having, well, they liken it to her having good armor and him being basically without armor entirely, not even with clothes, just completely vulnerable to Hannibal, how he's still Hannibal, like vulnerable to Hannibal now and going to visit him. And as Bedelia and Will talk about Hannibal, both of their relationships and impressions of Hannibal, we then flash back to Bedelia and Neil's last session, where we find out that Neil, in his sessions with Bedelia, was accusing Hannibal of malpractice, but Bedelia was reluctant to see a negative in a colleague that she had worked well with in the past, and so was basically telling Neil that she is not confident that what he is saying actually occurred. Neil indicates phototherapy, which caused him to have seizures, and how he had almost choked and swallowed his own tongue at that time, but then Hannibal hadn't really done anything, and Bedelia, of course, she doesn't discount fully what he says, but she's also not on board with what he's saying, and we kind of get a back and forth between the session with Will and the session with Neil, until eventually we get to the end of the session where Neil's death scene is played out, where he gets up, he gets agitated, and then he starts to choke on his tongue. Bedelia tries to help him, but he's so distrusting of her for not believing him that he's batting her away, so she's unable to clear his airway in time, ultimately resulting in him dying as she tries to help him and clear his airway. We then have Will visiting Hannibal again, and this time he brings the carving that was on the tree in the little hideaway that he had found in the previous episode, and he notes how that carving is on a mahjong tile and that it means the red dragon tile. And Hannibal comments on how he does not believe that Dollarhide is insane, that he believes that he is in the midst of his becoming, and that he had seen something in each of the families that he had slaughtered before, he went ahead with that slaughter, and how there's 11 more days until the full moon, and that Hannibal likes this killer and is excited to see his becoming and wonders what it's like to see the world through a red haze. Um, we then have Francis arriving at a museum, giving a fake name to log in, claiming to be a researcher. And the painting that he's been obsessed with this entire time about the Great Red Dragon, the original copy is stored at this museum. So he's led there by one of the museum staff who is showing him the painting, and he then knocks her out, drags her body off, and proceeds to eat the painting. And this, of course, is when Will arrives at the museum to look at the painting, because during their conversation, Hannibal also mentioned the painting. And when they arrive, he is told that he's the second person to ask to see the painting that day. His guide goes in to find the other guide who has been knocked out, and Will notices Dollarhide sneak into the elevator behind them. His shoe is sticking out, so he goes to the elevator, looks at Dollarhide. Dollarhide picks him up, throws him into the wall before then throwing him out of the elevator. Elevator closes. Will gets up, runs up the stairs into the museum lobby. However, it is empty at this point, so he has unfortunately lost Dollarhide's trail, and that is where we end this episode. So now that we have been reminded about the episode, it is now time to rank the episode. As always, we will be ranking on our mostly objective ranking list, followed by the personal ranking list. So now we will start with our mostly objective rank values. So to start off, we have a +2 for our multi-episode supporting character development, which is Neil's death scene and his last session with Bedelia, which develops him more as a character and his experience with Hannibal before Bedelia and what ultimately led to his death, and how really it wasn't necessarily that Bedelia killed the patient, but rather that she had put the patient so off that he didn't want to accept her help to save him. And then another +2 for Dollarhide eating a priceless painting. We also have a +2 for the supporting relationship development between Reba and Dollarhide, where they have now engaged in physical intimacies. And each of those things were worth 2 points, bringing us up to 6 points total. Then we had our multi-season supporting character development, which was basically all around Bedelia. We have Bedelia giving speeches about her time with Hannibal, the version of events that she made up to be her alibi to kind of get out of any responsibility for anything that she may have done while accompanying him to Italy. Then Bedelia Neal's history, which parallels a session with Will, whom she is now having therapy sessions with as her patient. And all of that together is worth 3 points, and then a +4 points for our multi-season main character development, which is that Will has begun to have therapy sessions with Bedelia, focusing and centering around Hannibal and his relationship with Hannibal. Which then brings us to the negatives, and there are 2, though it does fall under the same category, each worth a -2 points. The first one, of course, is Bedelia, seemingly gaining fame and most likely money from her own lies about her time with Hannibal, as that is the version she's running with, though we as the audience know that that is not true. So obviously making money off of lies cannot be considered positive behavior or messaging. So it is negative messaging or behavior. And then the second negative is a priceless painting held by a museum being devoured, eaten by a delusional man who thinks he's turning into a dragon. That's, well, obviously property damage. That's theft because they're not going to be able to get that painting back. He uses an alias to get in there, so stealing of an identity or using a false identity. Either way, basically everything about that scene is a negative messaging or behavior and is definitely a crime, which is always negative messaging or behavior. And so, with all of that being said, that brings this episode to a 9 out of 10 episode. And that brings our mostly objective ranking list for season 3 so far to in first, Dulce, Digestivo, The Great Red Dragon, Primavera, Aperitivo, and The Woman Clothed in Sun, which is this episode, is in 6th place. Then we have Antipasto, Contorno, and The Woman Clothed with the Sun, and Secondo is in 10th place so far. Now, my personal feelings about the episode are limited. Basically, I'm not overly fond of Dollarhide as a character. I understand that they're focusing on that this is the main killer in the books that they base the series on, and that obviously they want to spend more time developing him as a character because he is the main antagonist for this section of season 3 and the finale of the series. So I understand why they want to spend more time developing him. But I watched the series for Will and Hannibal, so because there was a very large portion of the beginning of the episode spent on his date with Reba and his time with Reba, etc., it didn't speak to me as much as an episode. However, I really did like the Will heavy part of the episode, and I do like Bedelia as a character. I think she's my favorite female character of the series, so I do enjoy that we got Bedelia back again for her speech at the beginning and then her session with Will and session with Neil. I liked that they were developing that backstory. But again, Neil's long dead. Um, and while that kind of came up a lot in season 1 at this point, I don't know that I necessarily care about that particular story. I do find her conversation with Will was very interesting, but ultimately it was a sit-down conversation, and I do think that the things I said were interesting. Hannibal setting things up. And also, there was a confrontation with Will and Dollarhide at the end of the episode. I did get a major ick from eating a painting because who knows what kind of chemicals are in that thing and like how old it is, how many hands might have touched it before it was considered to be, you know, priceless and should be protected from such things. So I kind of had to balance the heavy Dollarhide influence in this episode with but I like the heavy Will influence in this episode. And while I did find the conversation between Will and Bedelia interesting, it still ultimately was just them talking, which was entertaining, but not as entertaining as some other things. And I did like the ending of the episode with that confrontation, but it was so brief that I don't know necessarily that it was the greatest thing ever, but it also wasn't boring because I do like Will as a character. Bedelia is my favorite female character. Will and Hannibal are kind of tied for first on the male character side. And the ending was really good. It was a good cliffhanger, a good place, I think, to leave the episode. So I'm kind of fighting with my emotion while watching was kind of boredom. But on the other hand, when I look at each individual scene, there were a lot of things that I would like about the episode, which makes scoring it a little bit more on the difficult side because, this is the personal ranking where emotions really do come into play, and I was kind of bored. So, uh, I don't know. Um, I've decided to give it a 6 out of 10 in this case. Because I was kind of overall bored and I don't really like the Dollar Hide Heavy section of the episode, that's where I'll take the points from. But the Will Heavy side of the episode, Bedelia Heavy side of the episode, and the fun cliffhanger at the end is where all of the points came from. So with that being the case, we have in first place Digestivo, second Dulce, Contorno, The Great Red Dragon. This episode and The Woman Clothed in Sun comes in fifth place. Then we have Aperitivo, Primavera, Secondo, and The Woman Clothed with the Sun. And then in 10th place currently is Antipasto. Which now brings us to our series ranking so far. And on our mostly objective side, Season 2 came in first with 86.92%, Season 1 second with 83.85%, and the current season is at 84 out of a possible 130. On our personal ranking side, we have Season 2 in first place with 88.46%, Season 1 in second with 66.92%, and then Season 3 so far has a score of 62 out of a possible 130. So with that, we have now rewatched and ranked Hannibal Season 3, Episode 10, and The Woman Clothed in Sun. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.